Give your Bibles, go ahead and open up to the book of Colossians. We are on the back end of the book. We have covered a lot of material. We should be finishing out chapter 30, I'm going to say 2 weeks, and then probably another week, maybe 2 weeks of chapter 4. We'll move on to something different. But I've enjoyed this study, and I think it's beneficial. So let's recap a little bit and talk about what all we've gone over with the book of Colossians. So, who are the Colossians? Tell me about the church there in Colossae. Yeah, it's a church that's largely Gentile, but with all the churches of the ancient world, there's a significant Jewish population too, and so there's some Jew-Gentile dynamics. And what's the attitude between Jews and Gentiles, generally speaking? It's not very good. You've got some long-seated historical differences that I'm sure were really challenging to overcome. But as Paul goes on in this epistle, there's the gospel's for all. We're going to see today that this gospel is not just for Jews, it's not just for Gentiles, it's not just for free or slaves, men or women. The gospel is going to be for all. So what are some of the things that we've talked about so far in this book of Colossians? Well, we talked about who Christ is. The first half of the book talks about this very theological. It talks about who God is, who Christ is, what Christ has done for us. Christ is the preeminent one. He's supreme. He's the one who holds all things together. Christ is God who took on flesh. Christ reconciled us to God. He restored that relationship that we had damaged through sin. Paul talks about his ministry, how he's suffering for the cause of Christ, because this gospel is for the Gentiles as well. And so he sees himself as a minister, and not just sees himself, he is. He's a minister of the gospel. He brings the gospel to those who have not heard it. And so Paul goes through all those sufferings that he goes through, but it's worth it because he has a message that's worth sharing. And then he gets into a little bit, it starts kind of conflict resolution a little bit. There's some tendency, between the hostility between the Jews and the Gentiles, there's a tendency to kind of backslide into what you know, right? And that's just human nature to some extent. What were the Gentiles tempted to kind of backslide into? Idolatry, philosophy, trying to find meaning in places other than Christ. And so Paul says, hey, wisdom's only found in Christ. If you want to live a good life, you have to know Christ. And what's the temptation to backslide Jews fall into? The old law, right? You're raised a certain way for generations and generations, and now Christ has come and the law has changed. We're not bound by that old law anymore. We're now bound by the new law, the new covenant. And so there was a lot of growing pains there. They were trying to enforce the old law upon the Gentiles, and the Gentiles didn't want to obey the old law, and there's some hostility. And so what's Paul's solution? What does he say? How should he respond? What's the answer? Stop trying to bind those things on people because we're not under the old law anymore. We adhere to what Christ says, not the old law, not what man says. And so then we've got to hit a transition point with chapter 3. So the first half of the book is very theological. It tells about Christ and God and what they've done. The second half of the book is more practical. It's kind of direct, and it tells you, this is what you need to do. And so last week, what all did we talk about in chapter 3, verses 1 through 4? Yeah. Paul's talking about your mind, right? You need to have your mind set on things above, not on things of the earth. And so the reasoning is because you have died, your life is hid with Christ. And so you're a Christian now, you're something new, you're something different, and so your mind needs to be put, positioned towards spiritual things, not earthly things. And so we're going to pick up this week in a continuation of that kind of thought, of where your mind is, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your mind is, your actions are going to follow through and live that out. And so we're going to pick up with that context and pick up in Colossians, rather. Those are the long verses. Colossians chapter 3, verses 5 through 11. Let's go ahead and read those. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming. In these you too once walked. You were living in them. But now you must put them all away: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices, and have put on the new self, which is renewed in the knowledge after the image of its Creator. Here there's not Greek or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free, but Christ is all and in all. So, one of these features, when you go through Paul's writing, you see a lot of lists. Paul likes lists. And he has a long list of vices, or sometimes we call it the tears of the flesh. And what is a vice? Just kind of you have vices and virtues, right? And they're kind of polar ends of each other. What is a vice?
Something you lean on for comfort, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of there's sinful things, negative qualities that you kind of lean on. What is a virtue?
Well,
qualities that you try to develop. Patience is a virtue. Patience takes time to work on, to develop, to grow in yourself. And vices are kind of the opposite. It's kind of what you give in and you do. And so Paul is going to have one of these. He lists a lot of, I think, vices here. Things that you just kind of lean into, and things you give into that you really shouldn't. And so, look at what he says. You put to death, therefore, what's earthly in you. Putting to death. What does that make you think of? What's he trying to say? He says, you put these things to death. Yeah, this is final, right? There's some finality here. This is, you are not coming back to this. It is dead. It is not coming back. It is not going to have a resurgence in your life. You're not going to participate in these things anymore. It is gone. And so, that's an easy thing to say, but it's a difficult thing to practice, right? It's easy to say, I am done lying, or I am done, insert sin here. But what happens? Some time goes by, and it creeps back in. And it gets in, and sometimes when it creeps back in, it gets a stronger hold than it did at the beginning. And so, when you put something to death, you're done with it. Christians are done with sin. We once were sinful, and that's what he's going to say here in a little bit, but now we're not. Now we're something new. We're done with the sin that once defined us, that we once lived with. And so, he then gets into some of these sins that we are dead to. Put to death, therefore, what's earthly. And we talked last week about earthly things versus spiritual things. What are earthly things again? Versus spiritual things? Yeah. What man's wisdom is a big part of it. Things that are carnal, like those fleshly desire kind of things. And that's what Paul's going to get into. He says, put to death what's earthly in you. And he gives a list. And I don't think this is exhaustive. I think it's just kind of, exemplary. But he says, sexual immorality. Or what's the King James say? Yeah, fornication. King James does a better job translating here than most other translations. But put to death in you fornication. What is fornication? Or sexual immorality, as it says in some translations. Yeah, it's sex out of marriage. Sex is not an inherently sinful thing, right? There's a time and a place for it. Like all things, there's a time and a place. And what the Bible teaches is that sex is appropriate where? Within the confines of marriage. In Matthew chapter 19, verse 9, take a look at that verse real quick. If you would, whoever's there, if you want to go ahead and read it, that'd be great. Matthew chapter 19, 9. When we look at the Bible, we see marriage is a lasting union. It's two people who are a man and a woman, and now they become one flesh. They become one entity in a sense. And there's a union between two people, and it's meant to last. It's meant to endure. But Matthew chapter 19, 9, what do you see?
Now I say to you that whoever divorces his wife, except for immorality, and marries another, commits adultery.
Yeah. Whoever divorces his wife except for immorality or fornication, it's the same word. They commit adultery. And so you see that marriage is a union that's only broken by two things: death and an unfaithful spouse. And so sexual immorality then is something that's very significant, especially for those who are married. It gives the other spouse a right to divorce. And so we should take sexual morality, not immorality, immorality too, we should take it very seriously. We should strive to be above board. And so the first list is sexual immorality, and that's something that so many people have struggled with. And then what's the next thing that he lists? Impurity or uncleanliness. What does that make you think of? We think of something that's impure or unclean. What does that make you think of? Yeah, it makes you think of the old law, right? When Daniel was before Nebuchadnezzar wanted him to eat the food that wasn't prepared, as God would have Jews eat prepared food, kosher laws. What's the reason that he gives that he doesn't want to eat the king's food? He doesn't want to defile himself. He doesn't want to make himself impure. And so in the Old Testament, you see that purity is a really big deal. Cleanliness is a really big deal. There's a lot of things that could make it unclean under the old law, right? What are some of those things? Eating food that's not prepared according to the law, kosher law.
Touching a dead body.
Touching a dead body, yeah. Leprosy. Yeah, there's a whole host of things in the Old Testament that would make you unclean. And what's the problem with being unclean then? Think about, we could tie this into Jesus. When Jesus is hung on the cross, why did they take him down that day? Why did they hurry up to the crucifixion? Yeah, you got Sabbath coming, you got all the holidays coming, and so they don't want to be made unclean before the holidays, right? They want to be able to worship God. And so in the Old Testament, if you're spiritually unclean, you can't worship in the same way. You're separated from God. It's a significant thing. You become clean again, but there's a period that you have to wait before you can go into the temple, before you can worship God, before you can do various things. And so your cleanliness is important. Impurity, uncleanliness, they're opposed to holiness. God is holy, God is pure, God is clean. And when you let those things in your life become unclean, you become separated from God. And so impurity, uncleanliness is a big deal. We need, not that we're under the old law, but we need to be spiritually pure, spiritually clean. And so sexual immorality, impurity. What's the next on the list? Passions. Yeah. Well, passions is a kind of interesting one, right? The word there is pathos, like pathos. We typically think of like passion as a good thing, right? To some degree. You can have a passion for this or a passion for that, and you're all on fire for it. You're excited. And why is passion listed as a negative here? Why would passion be a negative quality here?
It would be possible for my passion to be connected to earthly things. And if it's something that I want to do and something that I enjoy doing, but it's possible that that will take away the time and the effort of doing what it's.
Yeah, you can have a passion for good service. That's a good thing. You can have a passion for sinful things too, though. And that's a detriment. I think partly what he's trying to say is, if you're just so thrown about by your emotion, and the word is literally just emotion, you're going to have a hard time doing it. There's sometimes you can know the right thing to do, but you just feel the wrong way about it, and you just don't want to do it. I think he's warning, you gotta sometimes let your head do the talking. Sometimes emotions will lead you astray. I can't remember the proverb off the top of my head, but there's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is destruction. Sometimes, if you're just thrown to and fro by your feelings, by your emotions, not that emotions are inherently a bad thing, but they can get in the way. And so Christians, you need to know the right thing to do and act on that. It's important to feel the right things as well. But yeah, you look at what Paul did. Paul did all those pretty terrible things. Paul was persecuting and murdering Christians and throwing them in jail. He said he did it with a clear conscience. He felt that it was the right thing to do. But that doesn't make it the right thing to do. Passions and then evil desires or evil lusts. Things that are consuming, things that you just desire to do. Those things. You can have passion for good things, but again, you can have passion for evil. And then I think this last one's pretty interesting. He says covetousness, which is idolatry. What is covetousness? What is idolatry? And are they the same thing? How are they the same thing?
You could want something so bad. You say you could.
Yeah.
So bad, it becomes an idol.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it's getting at. If you just, there's things that I want. There's things that I would like to have, but if that becomes a fixation, if I take a car for example. I really want this certain car, and it consumes me, and all I can think about is just what I can do to get ahead and get that car, wealth, and things like that. They become idols in a sense, de facto idols. They're things that your priorities are pointing towards that. Your affections are pointing towards that. Your devotion is towards making money or getting a car. And so, in a sense, that greed, it takes the place of God. It's become an idol. You're not relying on God anymore. You're relying on, you're working towards that. And so, covetousness can become a de facto idol for you. Not that you're worshiping money in the same way that you would worship, an idol back then, but it becomes something that takes the place of God in your life. It becomes the object of your devotions, and that's an issue. And so all of these things, they're considered earthly. And why should we stay away from these things? Why should we abstain from these things? Look at verse 6. Yeah. On these things, the wrath of God is coming on I counted these things rather than God. And so you get this picture of, God is we like to picture God as grandfatherly, with the long white beards and long clouds and a rocking chair. We have a cartoonish idea of God, but that's not the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible He's kind, He's good, He's God is love, but God is also a God of justice. And He's a God of, Paul writes in Romans, consider the kindness and severity of the Lord. He's kind, but He's severe as well. And so, the wrath of God, it reminds me of in Exodus, I think it's Exodus chapter 32, verse 9 through 10. Let's just turn there. Exodus 32, 9 through 10. Sometimes you just want to give the Israelites a slap upside the head. And this is one of those occasions. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai. He's receiving the 10 Commandments. He comes down, and what does he see? They made a golden calf. Come on, guys. He was gone 40 days, and you guys have already made an idol. Good grief. And so in verses 9 through 10, the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it's a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. And then look at verse 11. But Moses implored the Lord and said, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against the people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power, with a mighty hand? And so you see that right after God gives the 10 Commandments, right after God gives the law of Moses, Moses comes down, they see the golden calf. Come on. And then what's God's reaction? It's I'm just going to destroy him. I've had enough of this. And, because of Moses' intervention, they end up getting spared. But, what invoked God's wrath? Why was God angry?
I thought it was really big thing.
Yeah. After all that God had done to them, right? God had just led them out of Egypt. God had just, performed the 10 plagues, done all those amazing things. And yet here they are, and they're attributing it to a golden calf. Come on. Don't you know who God is? And so, God takes their sinfulness, their idolatry very seriously. What is sin? What determines if something is sinful or not sinful? Sin is what God is not, right? No, God is who God is. And we know that God cannot lie, God cannot sin. No, sin is acting in contrary to the nature of God. No, God is truthful. Sin is telling lies, being deceitful. No, God is justice. Sin is doing injustice. No, God is righteousness. Sin is being unrighteous, ungodly. And so sin is a rejection of God. Sin is what divides us from God. And so God takes that very seriously. It invokes His wrath. It invokes His anger against those who commit the sins. And so this is a warning. Put to death all these things, because if you don't, the anger of God's going to be against you. It's coming. And so that should send a little shiver down your spine. I don't want to be on the wrong end of God's wrath, God's anger. And then let's pick up in verse 7 through 11. Verse 7 through 11. In these you too once walked, when you were living in them. But now you must put them all away. Anger, wrath, malice, slander, obscene talk from your mouth. And so, do not lie to one another, seeing that you put off the old self with its practices, and put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the end of its period. And so, you see, in verse 7, in these you once walked when you were living in them. We were once living in sin. We once walked in these ways. But there's a past tense on that, right? This is not what you're doing anymore. You once did that. but now you're doing something different. Now you're something new. In 1 John chapter 1, verse 8, well, let's just go ahead and read it. 1 John 1, 8, and then look at verse 10, if you would. Whoever's there. 1 John 1, 8, and 10.
If we say that we have no sin, we are deceiving ourselves, and the truth is not in us. Verse 10, if we say that we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us.
Yeah. And so, if you say you've not sinned, what are you doing? You're lying. Just a split second of self-introspection will show you that that is wrong. This claim to be sinless, that is incorrect. And furthermore, if you claim that you're sinless, what are you doing? You're claiming that God's a liar. Because God has said, all have sinned, all the glory of God. God has said that you sin. And so I'm not prepared to call God a liar. I don't know about you. But just a moment of self-introspection, you realize that, I've messed up and I've let sin into my life in the past, and I'm trying to do better, but there's still, sin is sticky. It's hard to get off. And so you once walked in sin, you're not doing it anymore, it's implied, but now you must put them all away. All those earthly things. Anger, wrath, malice, slander. Is anger sinful? Is it sinful to be angry? No. Yeah, Jesus was angry, right? Do what? Yeah, there is righteous anger. Yeah, Jesus was justified in what he was doing. Ephesians chapter 4, 26 through 27 says, "Be angry, do not sin, do not let the sun go down on your wrath." You can be angry and you cannot sin. But what's the problem if you're an angry person? Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. What happens if you allow anger to dwell? If you allow it to stay?
You don't reason well. Contact others. You let your anger take over, and it's so easy to say something harmful to somebody else when you're angry.
Yeah, it poisons you from the inside, right? You allow a grudge to take hold and to stay and to grow. It affects your life. The emotion of anger is not sinful. Jesus was angry. Jesus did not sin. He had a righteous justice, but he didn't let that dwell. Jesus forgave. And so if you allow sin into your life, if you allow it to sit there and to stew and to dwell, it's going to affect the way you live your life. You're not going to be doing the things that you need to be doing if you're just angry all the time. And so anger, it has its place, it has its time, but don't just be an angry person, because that's going to lead you down that road. And so anger, wrath, and the word wrath, anger and wrath are very similar words. In Colossians, the word that God's wrath, the word wrath there is the same word as anger in verse 8. So there's a little bit of translation wonkiness going on. But the word wrath in verse 8, it's indignation. If you're indignant about somebody, what's that kind of attitude? Indignation.
I'm right where you're going, I don't care what you say.
Yeah. It's stubbornness. It's like rage. It's that kind of attitude. Does that attitude lead people to Christ? No. That attitude will take. People come in the door and they'll come right back out. That is not a productive attitude. Malice, evil intent. It's to cause harm to other people. That kind of maliciousness. That Christians can't be malicious people. Christians can't be just trying to hurt, just trying to get a little dig at somebody. And then slander. And the word slander is actually the word blasphemy, harmful speech. Talking bad about somebody, just trying to undermine and trying to make them hurt, that kind of attitude, those kind of things, those traits, they have no business being Christians. Christians shouldn't be angry people, because we've been forgiven. How can we not forgive others? Christians shouldn't be indignant. We shouldn't be, stubborn and angry. Christians shouldn't be malicious. We shouldn't be talking bad about people behind their backs. Rather, you got to put those things off. And Paul uses the analogy to put on, put off, and it's literally the word like to get dressed. Like, you know, you undress. Imagine if you, well, I'll tell myself. I was walking down the hill of our house, and I took a tumble. And I got mud like caked down my back, all down my legs. Like I was just caked. And walking back up, I fell again. But you know, there was nothing like. I wanted nothing more than just to get rid of those dirty clothes, take a shower, and get nice and clean. But before you, like, what happens if you just don't put those off? And you just go put on your new clean clothes on top of your nice pajamas. You put your pajamas on over your muddy clothes. That's disgusting. Like, and you're some kind of animal, you know. That makes no sense. You got to take off the dirty stuff before you put on the new stuff. What happens if you just take off the dirty stuff and you don't put anything else on? Well, then you got an issue too. And so Paul's saying you got to take off the old and put on the new. You know, get rid of those muddy clothes and put on the new man, the new self. And so look at what he says in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. This is, I think, a really good parallel passage. Verse 10 of Colossians says, you put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. What's Romans 12:2 say? Yeah. Do not be conformed to the world. Don't go along with what the world says, but be transformed, become something new. And how do you achieve that? In both Colossians and in Romans. The renewal of your mind. And so, there's this idea of repentance. In the Bible, repentance, the word literally means a changing of the mind. The things that you once did, you're not doing those things anymore. Your mind has shifted, you've changed perspective, you've changed focus. And that's what Paul's saying in chapter 3. Set your mind on things above, not on things of the earth. Where your mind is, there your actions are going to follow suit. And so if your mind is set on earthly things, you're going to be an earthly kind of person. But if your mind is set on spiritual things, you're going to start doing spiritual things. And so put off the old self. Get rid of your earthly focus and all those things that go with it. The sexual immorality, the impurity, the passion, the evil desire, covetousness, anger, wrath, malice, slander, obscene talk. Get rid of all those things because they don't have any place to be with a Christian. And that's the mud that's on your clothes. Take that off, take a shower, put on the new clothes, and be cleaned by the renewal of your mind. Through hard work. It's not purely an emotional thing. It's an intellectual thing as well. We have a reasoned faith. And so we're reasonable, logical creatures, and we can make those decisions to do what's right, even when it's difficult. And the end result in verse 11, here there's not Greek and Jew, uncircumcised, circumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free. Christ is all and in all. And so, we're held together not by blood. We're not, the church is something that's made out of Greeks and Jews. People who've had historical differences, circumcised, uncircumcised. This isn't the old law. It's for everybody. Barbarian, Scythian. Barbarians were people that, uncivilized people in their minds. Scythian is, it's an island in the Mediterranean. It's like, culture kind of people. Cultured, uncultured, slave, free. But Christ is all and in all. And so the church is not, a group of homogenous, same kind of people. The church is diverse. The church is made up of all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds. And what are we held together by? We're held together by God. And that's a stronger glue than That's stronger than blood, that's stronger than, social status, that's stronger than race, that's stronger than whatever. The church is unified on the basis of Christ. And so you got to start acting like it. And so next week, we're going to talk about, we talked a lot about this week about what you're putting off. You're putting off those vices, those things that kind of hold you back. Next week, we're going to talk about what you actually put on. And Paul's going to go through a list of virtues. Then we'll get into what Paul has said about Christian households. Thank you.